Déclaration de ministre.
Statements by ministers.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In February last year, the coronavirus disease discovered in 2019 gave us a new word, COVID-19. But even as COVID-19 took hold of our planet, even as this new word took over our lives, we found ourselves talking about other words, too, about words that weren't new at all. Sacrifice and solidarity, compassion and community. When the pandemic hit last year, these words, words that have defined Canadians for generations, were suddenly given new meaning. It has been a tough year, a heartbreaking year, but it has been a year that we have faced together, and that is something we must never forget. Mr. Speaker, on this National Day of Observance for COVID-19, we remember the people we've lost, grandparents and parents, brothers and sisters, friends and colleagues. Each one was loved. Each one was special. Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, the pandemic officially turns 1 today. March 11th, 2020 will always be a date for which there will be a before and an after. For family members and loved ones, each death also marks a before and an after. Today, we remember the people who have lost their lives to COVID-19. They are no longer with us, but they are in our memory. Since the major wars of the 20th century, there is a sentence that we use often and that we can use for those that we lost this year during the pandemic. We will remember them.
Speaker, a year ago, Canadians were asked to stay home and stay safe. And yet, even apart, or perhaps because we were apart, our communities became stronger and stronger. Businesses stepped up to produce PPE when we needed it most. Some went from making hockey masks to face shields. It doesn't get more Canadian than that. Students and teachers learned how to do school online, and kids did the dishes while they were doing their homework. Young people across the country stepped up to help their neighbors, to serve their communities. Essential workers made sure the shelves were still stocked with food. People cheered from balconies in solidarity with healthcare workers, the heroes of this pandemic. Brave women and men in the armed forces answered the call of duty for Indigenous communities and for the greatest generation now in long-term care homes. They were there for our parents and grandparents. And through that service, we saw clearly that for every senior in Canada, we must do better. And I know that we will. Malgré tout,
there is hope on the horizon. Vaccination is ramping up. Millions of doses are on their way. It is not time to give up. Mr. Speaker, while people continue to make efforts, I know that they are reassured when they see all of their leaders working together, beyond partisanship, beyond party lines. We are in the midst of an unprecedented crisis. It will take the talent, the know-how, and the ideas of all Canadians to see what the future brings. We will not be able to rebuild a fair economy for everyone if we are divided. We will not be able to develop major societal projects if we refuse to listen to one another. Over the past year, we have worked together to move forward. And this year, we will continue to work together to rebuild.
And community, sacrifice, and solidarity. This is where we find meaning in the depths of grief. This is our light through a dark time. Every Canadian we lost to this virus will be remembered. Every shift done by a frontline nurse, every mask made by a Canadian worker will not be forgotten. We are stronger together, today, tomorrow, and always. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, today we recognize a somber National Day of Observance for COVID-19, a virus that has caused a crisis of historic proportions here in Canada and around the world. More than 22,000 Canadians have died from COVID-19. Hundreds of thousands have fallen ill, and millions have lost jobs or have had their work severely cut back. Des Canadiens sont partis sans voir leur...
Canadians are gone. I've gone months without seeing their family and loved ones. A number of parents have done what they have been able to do to help their children out at home. And Canadians must also face a number of secondary effects linked to the pandemic. Many workers are worried about their colleagues' mental health. Thousands of cancer operations have been delayed. Drug and alcohol abuse rates have also increased. Domestic violence is the pandemic in the shadows of the COVID-19 pandemic.
60% more deaths from the opioid epidemic than from COVID-19. Increasing rates of domestic violence have been the shadow pandemic this past year. Youth mental health, presenting as anxiety or eating disorders, are alarmingly on the rise. The true cost of this pandemic on the lives and livelihoods of Canadians of all walks of life has been staggering. And yet, after a year, Canadians still aren't sure when we can expect life to get back to normal again. We all want that. When we can go back to work regularly, see our classmates in school like we used to. When everyone can expect their vaccinations.